The scenery started to distort, turning illusory and began to fade away. After Klein left his dreamlike state, his vision adapted to the darkness in the room. He knew that with £1 and 10 soldi, which was 30 soldi a week, Benson didn't have an easy time supporting the family according to the standards of an average family. He had thought that the majority of workers earned 20 soldi a week. He had once heard Melissa remark that Lower Street of Iron Cross Streets had 5, 7, or even 10 families squeezing into the same room. He also learned from Benson that as a result of the situation in the southern continent, the kingdom's economy was in a recession for the past few months. He knew that a maid, with board and lodging provided, could earn between 3 soldi and 6pence to 6 soldi a week. Klein extended his hand and pinched his glabella. He was silent for a long time, until Sir Wayville asked, "Officer, aren't you going to say anything?" The psychiatrists I went to would always speak to me and ask questions in such a situation. However, I must say that I feel at peace. I almost fell asleep. I haven't heard any moans or cries yet. How did you do it? Klein leaned back in the rocking chair. Instead of providing an answer, he asked with a gentle tone, "Sir, do you know about lead poisoning? Do you know about the dangers of lead?" De Wayville fell silent for a few seconds. "I did not know about it in the past, but I do now. Are you telling me that my psychological illness stems from my guilt toward the female lead and porcelain factory workers?" Without waiting for Klein to answer, he continued just like he always had in his position of power during a negotiation. "Yes, I did feel guilty about this in the past, but I did compensate them. At my lead and porcelain factories, the workers do not earn less than other workers in the same industry. In Backland, lead and porcelain workers are paid no more than 8 soldi a week, but I pay them 10, sometimes even more. Hey, many people criticize me for breaking ranks since it makes it hard for them to recruit workers. If not for the Grain Act that made many farmers bankrupt, sending them to the cities, they would have had to raise their wages just like I did. Furthermore, I've also informed the supervisor of the factories to make sure that those with repeated headaches and blurry vision are to leave the areas where they are exposed to lead. If their illness is really severe, then they can even ask for help at my charity foundation. I think I have done enough." Klein spoke without a ripple of emotion in his voice. "Sir, at times, you cannot imagine how important a salary is to a poor person. Simply losing work for a week or two can result in an irreversible loss to their family, a loss that would cause tremendous grief." He paused before saying, "I am curious, why wouldn't a kind person like you install equipment that can protect against dust and lead poisoning in your factories?" De Wayville looked at the ceiling and laughed ruefully. "That would make my costs too high for me to bear. I would no longer be able to compete with other lead and porcelain companies. I no longer pay too much attention to my profits in these areas of my business. In fact, I am even willing to fork out some money. But what's the point of keeping the business if I have to keep doing that? That can only help a number of workers and not become a standard in the industry or effect change on other factories. That would merely result in me forking out money to support the workers. I heard that some factories even secretly hire slaves to minimize costs." Klein crossed his hands and said after a moment of silence, "Sir, the root of your psychological illness comes from the build-up of guilt. Despite you believing that the guilt has faded and disappeared over time. It wouldn't have any visible effects under normal circumstances, but there was something that triggered you and set off all the problems at once. Something that triggered me." "I'm not aware of such a thing," De Wayville said, puzzled, but with conviction. Klein allowed the chair to rock gently as he explained with a gentle tone, "You did fall asleep for a few minutes just now, and you told me something." "Hypnosis." De Wayville made a guess as he usually did. Klein did not give a direct reply and instead said, "You once saw a girl dying on her way to work while you were on your carriage. She had died because of lead poisoning. She was one of your workers who glazed porcelain while she was still alive." De Wayville rubbed his temples, speechless before saying somewhat doubtful, "I think that happened once but I can't remember it clearly." His prolonged insomnia had left him in a poor mental state. He could only faintly recall seeing such a scene. He thought for a moment, but gave up taxing his brain. Instead, he asked, "What was that worker's name?" "Well, what I meant was, what should I do to cure my psychological illness?" Klein replied immediately, "2 things. First, the worker that died by the side of the road was called Haley Walker. That was what you told me. She was the most direct trigger, so you have to find her parents and give them more compensation. Second, spread information about the dangers of lead in the newspapers and magazines. Allow your charity foundation to help more workers who suffered from the damage. If you succeed in becoming a member of Parliament, push for enacting laws in this domain." De Wayville sat up slowly and laughed in a self-deprecating manner. "I will do all of the rest, but to enact a law, hey, I think it's impossible since there is still competition from nations beyond our country. Setting up such a law would just slip the entire industry in the country into a crisis. Factories would become bankrupt one by one, and many workers would lose their jobs. Organizations that help the poor cannot save that many people." He slowly got off the bed and adjusted his collar. He then looked at Klein and said, "Haley Walker, right? I'll immediately get Cullen to retrieve information about her from the porcelain company and find her parents. Officer, please wait with me and continuously evaluate my mental state." "All right." Klein stood up slowly and smoothed his black and white checkered police uniform. At 11 in the morning in the living room of De Wayville, Klein sat on the sofa in silence as he looked at the man and woman being guided into the house by Butler Cullen. The 2 guests had blemished skin, wrinkles already woven into their faces. The man had a slight hunch, while the woman had a mole under her eyelid. They looked nearly identical to what Klein had seen from Haley, just older and more haggard. They were so skinny that they were almost all bone. Their clothes were old and ragged. Klein even learned that they couldn't continue living on Lower Street of Iron Cross Streets any further. So, Klein sensed an icy wind start to spiral through his spiritual perception. He pinched his blabella and shot a glance towards Sir Wayville. It was unknown when a faint white, translucent, contorted figure had appeared behind him. Good morning, Honourable Sir. Haley's parents were unusually polite. De Wayville rubbed his forehead and asked, are the both of you Haley Walker's parents? Doesn't she also have a brother and a 2-year-old sister? Haley's mother answered in fear. Her brother broke his leg at the harbour some time back. We got him to take care of his sister at home. De Wayville remained silent for a few seconds before he sighed. My deepest condolences for what happened to Haley. Upon hearing that, the eyes of Haley's parents immediately turned red. They opened their mouths and said over each other, thank you for your goodwill. The police told us that Haley died from lead poisoning. That's the term, right? Oh, my poor child, she was only 17. She was always so quiet, so determined. You had sent someone to visit her before and sponsored her burial. She is buried at the Raphael Cemetery. De Wayville glanced at Klein and changed his sitting posture. He leaned forward and said with a serious tone, that was actually an oversight of ours. I have to apologize. I have considered that I need to compensate you, to compensate Haley. Her weekly salary was 10 solly, was it not? 1 year would be 520 solly, or £26. Let's assume that she could have worked for another 10 years. Cullen, give Haley's parents £300. £300? Haley's parents were dumbfounded. They never had more than £1 of savings, even at their richest. It wasn't only them who were dazed. Even the expressions of the bodyguards and maids in the room were also all that of shock and envy. Even Sergeant Gate couldn't help but draw in a deep breath. His weekly salary was only £2, and among his subordinates, only one chevron constable earned £1 a week. Amidst the silence, Butler Cullen walked out of the study and held a bulging sack. He opened the sack and revealed stacks of cash, some £1, some £5, but mostly made up of 1 or 5 solly. It was clear that De Wayville had made his subordinates receive change from the bank earlier. It's an expression of Sir De Wayville's goodwill. Cullen handed the sack over to Haley's parents after receiving confirmation from his master. Haley's parents took the sack and rubbed their eyes, looking at it in disbelief. No, this is too generous. We cannot accept this, they said as they held the sack tightly. De Wayville said in a deep voice, this is what Haley deserves. Why, you truly are a noble, charitable knight. Haley's parents bowed repeatedly in agitation. They had smiles on their faces, smiles that they couldn't repress. They praised the knight repeatedly, repeating the same few adjectives they knew. They kept insisting that Haley would be grateful towards him in heaven. Cullen, send them home. Oh, take them to the bank first. De Wayville heaved a sigh of relief and instructed his butler. Haley's parents hugged the sack tightly and walked toward the door quickly without stopping. Klein saw the faint translucent figure behind Sir De Wayville attempt to extend its hands towards them, hoping to leave with them, but the parents' smiles were abnormally radiant. They didn't turn back. That figure turned fainter and, soon, vanished completely. Klein also sensed that the icy feeling in the guest hall had instantly returned to normal. From beginning to end, all he did was sit there silently, not expressing his opinion. Officer, I feel much better. Now can you tell me why my butler, servants, and bodyguards could also hear the cries and moans? This shouldn't just be solely a psychological illness of mine, right? De Wayville looked at him curiously. Inspector Toll, who knew the underlying truth, instantly became nervous. Klein replied without much expression, in psychology, we call this phenomenon mass hysteria. Mass hysteria. Sir De Wayville, who had met many psychiatrists recently, ruminated over the term Klein had said. Despite their curiosity, his butler, bodyguards, and servants didn't make a single sound, since they had not been given permission by him. As for Sergeant Gate, he looked towards Klein doubtfully as if he had never heard of that concept. Klein controlled his habit of tapping the armrest with his fingertips and calmly explained, humans can be fooled easily by their sensory organs. Mass hysteria is a kind of psychogenic illness that is a result of tense nerves and other factors amongst a group of individuals as they influence each other. The jargon he spewed out confused Sir De Wayville, Sergeant Gate, and the rest, causing them to subconsciously opt to believe him. Let me give a simple example of this. This was one of the cases that I previously dealt with. One man held a dinner banquet and invited 35 guests. Midway, he suddenly felt disgusted and puked. After that, he even had severe diarrhea. After a couple times, he began to believe that he had gotten food poisoning. He shared his speculation with the other guests on the way to the hospital. In the next 2 hours, there were more than 30 guests that had diarrhea amongst the 35 guests, with 26 of them experiencing nausea. They flooded the entire emergency room of the hospital. The doctors went through a detailed examination and performed cross-checks, and they concluded that the very first man didn't have food poisoning at all. Instead, it was a result of stomach inflammation caused by the change of weather and cold liquor. The most surprising fact was that none of the guests who went to the hospital had food poisoning. In fact, not a single one of them was sick. That is mass hysteria. De Wayville nodded slightly and marveled, I understand now. Humans do lie to themselves easily. It's no wonder that Emperor Cell once said that a lie would become reality once it was repeated 100 times. Officer, how may I address you? You are the most professional psychiatrist I have ever met. Inspector Meriti. Klein pointed at his epaulet and said, Sir, your troubles have been resolved temporarily for now. You can try to sleep now while I determine if there are any other problems. If you are able to sleep well, please allow us to bid farewell ahead of time instead of waiting for you to wake up. All right. De Wayville massaged his forehead, took his cane, and walked upstairs to his bedroom. Half an hour later, the police carriage left the fountain at the door of de Wayville's residence. When Sergeant Gate got off on the way and returned to his police station, Inspector Toll looked towards Klein. He complimented in jest, "Even I believed that you were a real psychological expert." Before he finished his sentence, he saw the young man in a black and white checkered uniform looking expressionless. His eyes were deep and serene as he forced a smirk on his face and said, "I only had some experience with it in the past." Inspector Toll fell silent until the carriage arrived outside 36 Charlton Street. "Thank you for your assistance, allowing Sir de Wayville to be finally free from his problems and be able to find sleep again." He extended his hand and shook Klein's hand. "Thank done on my behalf." Klein nodded slightly and said, "All right." He went up the stairs and returned to the Blackthorn Security Company. He knocked and entered the captain's office. Dunn was waiting for his lunch. Klein massaged his forehead and kept his reply short and simple. The root of the problem stemmed from the lead and porcelain factory under Sir de Wayville. From the moment they were established to this day, too many deaths have been caused by lead poisoning. And every accident left Sir de Wayville with some resentful spirituality. Generally speaking, that wouldn't bring too big of a problem. That might cause nightmares, at the most. Dunn had experienced similar cases with his plethora of experience. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Yes, that's usually the case." But, unfortunately, Sir de Wayville encountered a female worker who died of lead poisoning on the streets. She collapsed by the side of the street and happened to catch a glimpse of the de Wayville's family emblem. She also harbored intense indignation, worry, and desires. It was only when Sir de Wayville gave her parents, brother, and sister a compensation of £300 did her emotions dissipate. This is a societal problem. It isn't rare in the age of steam and machinery. Dunn took out his smoking pipe, smelled the tobacco, and sighed. Workers that make linen work in damp environments, and are generally diagnosed with bronchitis and joint-related ailments. As for factories with serious powder and dust issues, even if the dust isn't poisonous, it can still accumulate into lung problems, so we don't have to talk about this. As the kingdom develops, I believe these problems will be resolved. Klein, let's find a restaurant tonight to celebrate you becoming an official member, all right? Klein thought for a moment before saying, "How about tomorrow, Captain? I have used spirit vision for an extended period of time today and also used dream divination to directly interact with those resentments. I'm feeling especially drained. I want to return home in the afternoon to get some rest. Would that be okay? Oh, then I'll head over to the Divination Club at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon to see how the club members are reacting to news of Harness Vincent's sudden death." "No problem, that's only necessary," Dunn chuckled. "Tomorrow night it is. Let's do it at Old Will's restaurant next door. I'll get Roseanne to make a reservation." Klein took off his police peak cap and stood up to salute him. "Thank you, Captain. See you tomorrow." Dunn lifted his hand and said, "Hold on, did you mention that Sir de Wayville gave the female workers' parents a compensation of £300? "Yes." Klein nodded and immediately understood the reason why the captain had mentioned it. "You are worried that they will get into trouble because of their wealth?" Dunn sighed. "I've seen many similar situations in the past." "Pass me their address. I asked Kenley to arrange for them to leave Tingen for another city, to start life anew." "All right," Klein replied in a deep voice. With all of that done, he left Dunn's office and entered the break room diagonally opposite. He changed into his original suit and left the police uniform in his locker. Klein took the public carriage back to Daffodil Street in silence. He took off his coat and top hat. He then heated up the leftovers from last night and ate them with the last piece of wheat bread to fill his stomach. Then, he went to the second floor, hung his clothes, and slumped into bed. When he woke up, the pocket watch showed that it was already 2:10 in the afternoon. The sun was hanging high up in the sky and the sunlight shone through the clouds. Underneath the golden splendor, Klein stood next to his desk and looked out the oriel window. He watched the pedestrians in old ragged clothing as they entered or left Iron Cross Street. Few he let out a breath slowly, finally overcoming his low spirits. Every journey had to be taken one step at a time. Likewise, his sequence needed to be advanced one level at a time. Everything worked like that. He shook his head and sat down. He started concluding and reorganizing his encounter over the last week, so as to reinforce the important points in his mind to prevent himself from forgetting them. 5 minutes before 3 in the afternoon. Above a blurry, boundless, greyish-white, silent grey fog stood a lofty palace. An ancient mottled bronze table sat there quietly. On the seat of honor at the long table sat a man already engulfed by the thick grey fog. Klein leaned against the back of the chair and contemplated. He suddenly extended his hand and tapped on the crimson stars that represented justice and the hanged man. Backland, Empress Borough. Audrey lifted her dress as she quickly walked towards her bedroom. Suddenly, she felt something and looked sideways at the shadow sitting on the balcony. As expected, she saw her golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting there in silence, observing her as always. Audrey sighed and drew a crimson moon on her chest. She then got closer and looked down at her golden retriever from a commanding position. "Susie, that's not right. This is peeping. A spectator has to observe in an open manner." The golden retriever lifted its head to look at its owner and shook its tail. After nagging her dog, Audrey didn't delay any further and continued walking towards her bedroom again. In the few seconds of opening and closing the door, she suddenly had a weird idea. I wonder if Mr. Fool would allow Susie to enter that mysterious space. Then, there would be 4 members in the tarot gathering. And all of them would be beyonders. No way, Susie can't talk. If they were to let her express her opinion and share her thoughts, what would she do? Woof woof woof, howl howl, you, why am I mimicking a dog's bark here? Just imagining such a scene feels really strange. A mysterious and solemn gathering with the sudden barking of a dog. Mr. Fool would definitely kick us out of the tarot gathering directly. Audrey locked the door and sat by the side of her bed. She took out a piece of old yellowish-brown paper from underneath her pillow. She read it repeatedly and entered her spectator state. In a particular area of the Sonia Sea, an old sailboat which was in pursuit of the listener had already left the Rorstad archipelago. Seafarer Alger Wilson was worried that the wall clock's machinery would malfunction. So he entered the captain's cabin about half an hour earlier in case he had misjudged the time, which would cause his subordinates to see him getting pulled into the tarot gathering. In front of him was a glass of nearly transparent liquor. The rich aroma swirled strand after strand into his nostrils. Alger trembled once again when he thought of the impending gathering, the boundless fog that presented itself in front of him in the hotel's corridor, and the mysterious fool who sat in the middle of the grey fog. He lifted his glass and took a gulp, using the burning sensation in his throat to ease the emotions that had stirred within him. Very soon, he restored his calm. He was as calm and stoic as he always was. Above the grey fog, gigantic stone columns held up a majestic divine hall. Two dark red globs extended out into faint human figures by the side of the ancient mottled bronze table. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Augmented with a blurry effect, Audrey greeted him with a bow and smiled. "It is unfortunate that there is no wine here. Otherwise, we could have a toast to your successful trial." She was referring to the ritualistic magic. "You are more powerful than we imagined," Alger Wilson praised as well. Klein was surrounded by the thick fog as usual. He pressed down with his right arm and spoke with his normal tone, replying as though it was natural. "Great, this means that we are on the path of excellence. If you have any matters to tend to that leave you unable to attend the gathering on Mondays, conduct the ritual and inform me. All you have to do is change the line in the incantation, 'I pray for a good dream,' with the reason." "All right," Audrey quickly agreed. "Mr. Fool, I obtained another page of Emperor Cell's diary. I believe I still owe you one page. I was away from land this week and haven't found any new pages." Alger placed his right hand near his chest and bowed in apology. "No matter, I expected my request to take a long time." Klein leaned back into his chair and tapped the armrest with his index finger. He looked at Miss Justice and said, "You can express the contents of the diary now." Audrey bowed slightly and said, "As you wish." A pen suddenly appeared before her. She recalled the symbols that she had memorized and tried her best to transcribe them. In seconds, she saw that the goatskin was already filled with content. The strange symbols neatly covered the entire page. After checking the contents, she put down the fountain pen and said, "It's done." Klein raised his hand and the goatskin parchment appeared in his palm. Shifting his gaze down, he started reading without emotion. July the 9th. I suddenly thought of an interesting question. Since the sequence pathways are also called the blessings of the divinities, or pathways of the divinities, then why would the stone slate that records the completed 22 sequence pathways be called a blasphemy slate? Blasphemy, what an interesting term. Just who is the one blasphemed? And who created the blasphemy slate? How could that person hold all of the sequence pathways? Just what other information was on the stone? I really want to see it. July the 12th. I've realized another fact today. The sealed artifacts are an important component of a church's overall strength, even though some of the sealed items are very, very dangerous. Among the 7 churches, the God of Craftsmanship wields the least number of sealed artifacts, which are also relatively less dangerous. Did I join an organization without a future? No, I should think of it this way. Only a blank piece of paper can produce a good painting. A weak organization is the best place for me to display my abilities. July the 14th. I saw the mysterious Mr. Zarathal again. I never expected him to be the leader of an ancient organization, the Secret Order. Klein's pupils constricted when he read this. He nearly revealed an unnatural expression. The Zarathal family only had a certain connection with the Secret Order in the notes of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. But now, he learned from Emperor Cell that the mysterious Mr. Zarathal was further determined to be the leader of the Secret Order. From the looks of it, it is an unquestionable fact that the Secret Order holds the seer sequence pathway. While Klein was reading the diary, Audrey looked over and began observing him out of habit. However, her field of vision was completely obscured by the thick fog. Momentarily taken aback, Audrey snapped back to her senses and turned her head frantically to look at the other illusory dark red star. I was too reckless, too insolent, too foolish in trying to observe Mr. Fool. I was lucky that he isn't angry. Audrey stuck out her tongue secretly and pretended to admire the scenery. She was just short of humming a lively tune. Alger sat silently, his gaze never leaving the long bronze table. He knew his place, as if he was in the presence of a true god. Klein collected himself and scanned the last portion of the diary. After learning that I had become a savant, Mr. Zarathal mentioned that I had chosen a difficult, yet relatively safe path. I asked him why that was the case, but all he did was smile before telling me that the sequence pathway contained secrets beyond my imagination. I couldn't help but ask him which sequence pathway he selected. He told me that his sequence 9 was seer. I intentionally mocked him and asked if every seer only disclosed half-truths, never explaining things more clearly. Furthermore, he was clearly a powerful high sequence beyonder. There was no need for him to continue acting as a seer. Mr. Zarathal told me that it was a habit he adopted from back when he was a seer, and that this was a method that could pique my curiosity and make me cooperate with him. He hoped that I could help him steal a dangerous sealed item from the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, a relic of the Antigonus family. Clearly, this must wait until I become a core member of the Church of the God of Craftsmanship. I asked Mr. Zarathal how long it would take to digest the potion if I used the acting method, and what standards I should use to determine if I had digested it completely. He told me that for the lower sequences, it would only take half a year to digest the potion as long as one strictly used the acting method. In fact, in the fastest case, it might only take a month. And standard measure for progress was simple. Every Beyonder would sense it immediately once the potion was completely digested. It is what it is. I asked him for more details, but he merely smiled at me. To hell with his smiles, I'll beat up every seer I see when I become a high-sequence Beyonder. Rest in peace. Emperor Klein read the diary several times before looking at Justice and the Hanged Man again. Sorry for the wait. It is our honor. Audrey was still shocked, forgetting that she was a spectator. She looked at the Hanged Man and organized her words. Where can I find the psychology alchemists? Psychology alchemists. Klein suddenly recalled the man buying supplementary ingredients for the spectator potion at the Tingen underground market. Perhaps he was a member of the psychology alchemists. Just as Klein was considering how to get closer to that man, the Hanged Man, Alger Wilson shook his head and said, Miss Justice, firstly, I don't have a clue. Secondly, I don't think there's any rush in seeking out the psychology alchemists. What you should focus on now is completely digesting the spectator potion. Audrey glanced at the fool and noticed that he didn't have any intention of adding to the conversation. She nodded in disappointment and said, All I want is to have plenty of time to prepare so that I can approach them more naturally. All right, then when can I digest the spectator potion and stop acting? Is there a standard that indicates when I can? I'm almost at the point where I no longer feel frustrated, nor do I hear the constant murmuring anymore. Alger looked at the fool in the fog, but saw that he didn't have any intention of speaking. He then deliberated before saying, if you don't use the acting method. The typical rule of thumb is to wait 3 years and confirm that you no longer feel restless or receive any auditory or visual illusions. There is one simple test to determine when you can. That method is to exhaust your body to its limit. If you still don't hear any maniacal murmurings or see any strange things at that point, that would mean that you're ready to advance. With regards to the acting method, I have also just come into contact with it. It feels good, so I don't think it'll take 3 years. That wasn't useful at all 3 years, that's too long, Audrey criticized inwardly. She had just thought about this when she heard an armrest being tapped. Audrey froze, then turned her head in joy. She saw the fool tapping on the edge of the long table. Alger sat straighter, waiting for the fool to speak. Klein said in his normal tone, fellow sequence Beyonders, as long as you strictly stick to acting, you should be able to digest the medicine in half a year. It's even possible to do it in a month. He looked at Justice and added, as for the signs of digestion, you'll know it when it comes. It doesn't need to be taught. 1 month rate. Thank you, Mr. Fool, Audrey exclaimed while brimming with joy. Miss Justice, don't think that you are the chosen one. The key point is half a year. Klein lifted his right hand and placed it beside his lips. Half a year, Alger repeated softly. Audrey sensed joy, relief, and intense doubt in his tone. What is he suspicious about? Audrey thought as she asked, Mr. Fool, have you considered adding more members? Klein leaned back casually. He had long prepared an answer. This started as a trial, so I didn't spend much time thinking about extending our meetings. But now, as a regular gathering, we must choose our members carefully. Secrecy is our motto. Audrey nodded gently and said, that is to say that we have to follow a process of observation, recommendation, and testing process. Yes, a process. You can interpret it that way, Klein affirmed. In his mind he was thinking about how he could inquire about the secret order and the clown potion. How can I ask questions in a way that befits my status? Klein was placed in a difficult spot. At that moment, realizing that Justice temporarily had nothing else to say, Alger took the initiative to speak. I've heard that a listener from the Aurora Order is searching for traces of the true creator, which is the holy residence they advocate. True creator? Audrey asked, puzzled. It is an ancient entity worshipped by numerous secret organizations and cults. They believe that the creator hasn't completely perished. The core he left behind is the true creator. Alger gave a rough explanation. Since the fifth epoch, the true creator has appeared in many forms, such as the hanged giant or the eye behind the shadow curtains. Hey, many people believe that Emperor Cell referenced the imagery of the true creator when he was creating the tarot cards. Hence, there exists the card of the hanged man. At this point, he looked at Klein and said, Mr. Fool, there's nothing with what I said, right? Is he trying to probe for my views on the true creator? Klein thought about the bloody man on the cross that the captain saw in Harness Vincent's dream and immediately had an idea. Doesn't both the hanging and the shadows imply evil connotations? Therefore, he chuckled and said, I am more inclined to call him the fallen creator fallen. Alger ruminated over the fool's words and fell deep in thought. However, what struck Alger the most was the fool's relaxed, natural, and nonchalant attitude. He acted as if they were equal. If he hadn't experienced their previous ritual, Alger might have thought the fool was merely bluffing and building himself up to intimidate him and Justice. But now, he was of the opinion that even if the fool was inferior to the true creator, he was at least close to that level. It's dangerous. It's also an opportunity, Alger muttered softly. He then spoke with a smile, Mr. Fool, your description is indeed more appropriate. According to our observations, Beyonders who believed in the true creator, know the fallen creator, have a high probability of losing control. The rest of them are mostly psychopaths. That's something that Talk's intelligence mentioned as well, and the so-called psychopaths didn't lose their sanity. Instead, their ideologies become twisted. Klein maintained his seated posture, but didn't continue with the conversation. He was still considering how to inquire about the secret order and clown potion, but he couldn't figure out a way of asking the questions in a way that fit with his persona. It's such a pity that the gathering is still so different from an internet forum. Otherwise, I could create another Smurf account to join the gathering, and that account would be in charge of asking questions that are inconvenient for me to ask. Perhaps, one day, I'll learn mirror-related magic and give it a try. For example, I can make half the members here my Smurf accounts. There are 22 chairs here, and there are 22 cards in the tarot deck. That matches up perfectly, but when I created this divine hall, I didn't even name myself the Fool or have any intention of forming a tarot club. Do these symbolize the 22 different sequence pathways? I wanted a divine hall, so a divine hall appeared. If I wanted a Smurf account, would I get a Smurf account? Upon seeing the Fool remain silently engulfed in the thick grey fog, Audrey asked both wistfully and curiously, "That sounds scary. Mr. Hanged Man, could you share, in detail, information about each and every mysterious organization? And also the matters regarding each secret cult? It's hard for me to come into contact with them during my daily life. I can only understand them through the both of you. I'm willing to pay for it. May I know what you'd like in return?" "That's a great question, Miss Justice. You're playing the role of my Smurf account to a certain extent this way. The Hanged Man will definitely bring up the secret audio the best." Klein's mind stirred when he heard that, but he didn't let his emotions show through his expression or movements. Alger thought for a moment before saying, "I need money, £1,000. It would be best if they weren't bills marked by a serial number. Or maybe gemstones that have just been unearthed. Price them according to the Background Jewelry Exchange's monthly average price. £1,000? That's a huge sum of money. It could be used to buy a house in a high-class street in Tingen City. Not everyone would have it available immediately. Captain might have an annual salary like that, I guess. Haley's death compensation was only £300, although Miss Justice is a noble. She obviously hasn't inherited her family's wealth yet. And she'll only be receiving some sort of annual allowance soon. It's no wonder that the Hanged Man stated that could be paid via gemstones. Klein was very sensitive towards monetary figures. Luckily, he was blanketed in thick fog. For a single lady or madam, £2,000 could let her live a decent life. If £2,000 were invested, the investment could reliably produce an annual return of about £100. £1,000? Audrey said, sounding shocked. She then replied happily, "No problem, do I send it to the previous address?" Judging by Miss Justice's tone, she finds it very cheap. Klein didn't look over. Alger was quiet for a good 20 seconds before he said, "Yes, send it to the Warrior and Sea Bar at Pelican Street, in the White Rose Borough of Brits Harbour. Tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants." All right. Audrey leaned back and posed in a spectator-like manner. "Mr. Hanged Man, you can start now." Alger looked at the Fool, deliberated for a moment before saying slowly, "Let's start from the Moses Ascetic Order. It is the earliest hidden organization. Of course, many think that the earliest hidden organizations are the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Church of Mother Earth, and the Church of the God of Combat. These people must be from the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom," Audrey refuted sulkily. "The Church of the Goddess is the earliest hidden organization." That was the first time Klein had heard of such a claim. What exactly happened in the fourth epoch or the third epoch? Alger smiled and said, "The truth is buried in ancient history. Only one thing is certain, no one has ever said that the Church of Lord of Storms, the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, or the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom were once hidden organizations. All right, let's save some time and return to main topic. The Moses Ascetic Order was first established by a few humans that had read the blasphemy slate. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic god, called the Hidden Sage. The description is that of a god, but it is more of an ideology, an actual law. For example, all objects are numeric. The Hidden Sage is an embodiment of spirit numerology. All that knowledge is supreme, and the Hidden Sage is knowledge itself. Hence, the original Moses Ascetic Order was a very respectable organization, and it maintained a good relationship with the other major churches. The members of the organization led ascetic lives to resist losing control and to resolve the effects of the remnant potion. They strictly kept their order's secrets, and they upheld moral and religious precepts. They believed that humans continuously reincarnate after death. The sequence 9 that they grasp is called Mystery Prior. The word Warlock was also spread from that organization. Audrey listened to the Hanged Man's description carefully and asked sharply, "You said that the Moses Ascetic Order used to be a respectable organization. Are they not one anymore?" Alger nodded his head indiscernibly. "Yes, they have fallen into corruption and are now an evil organization." "Why? I find their beliefs very good and very normal," Audrey expressed her confusion. That was Klein's confusion too. The information that he could get at his security clearance didn't provide the reason for the Moses Ascetic Order's fall from grace. Alger looked at the unfathomable Fool and tersely agreed. "I am not sure of the real reason. It might be because it has been buried by history. However, I have heard one terrifying explanation. In that story, the main reason why the Moses Ascetic Order fell into corruption was because the god that they believed in, the Hidden Sage, had come to life. He became the personification of an evil god." "Came to life? This how?" Audrey found it unimaginable as she replied with an incredulous tone. Without realizing it, she had exited from her spectator state. "It's like a horror story, but the ghost is even a god." Klein's heart stirred with a surge of emotions as well. "I'm sorry, no one knows the answer." Alger had originally wanted to casually say, "Maybe Mr. Fool would know," but he held back the urge. He had already tinted on the borders of danger once. In the Book of Storms 5:7, there was a saying that Alger remembered clearly, which was, "Do not test God." Audrey calmed herself down and didn't press for more answers. She gestured for him to continue. Klein maintained his seated posture and he silenced, validating the Hanged Man's descriptions with his own understanding. Finally, he realized that there were 4 points that he needed to take note of. First, the Demones sect was also known as the Demones family in the Fourth Epoch. Back then, they had very few members, and their beliefs were passed down through their bloodlines. Plus, they would kill the fathers of their children and abandon the baby boys. Hence, all the members were female. Of course, that was all from Alger's description, and there was no way to verify it at the moment. Second, the Numinous Pious Clopate that believed in death, and the Rose School of thought that like bloody sacrificial worship ceremonies both originated in the southern continent. After the colonial era came, they almost vanished under attacks by the seven churches. But as such, they began spreading to the northern continent. Third, the current psychology alchemists were similar to the earlier Moses ascetic order. They believed in a non-anthropomorphic existence and believed that the human spirit could change everything. Fourth, the secret order had the lowest activity level among all the other hidden organizations. Thus, they were the most unknown. Every time they appeared, they seemed to be after something or looking for something. What are they after or looking for? Klein suddenly recalled the diary which he had read earlier. The leader of the secret order, Zarathal, cooperated with the Racel. His goal was to get something left behind by the Antigonus family. Their appearance that time was to look for the lost notebook. The Antigonus family notebook. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly and felt that he had apparently found the key reason for the secret order's actions. They were after the things that the Antigonus family left behind. Klein suppressed his urge to tap the edge of the table as his thoughts appeared one after another. Oh, they were looking for remnant traces the Antigonus family left behind. Then must I direct my focus onto these areas to obtain the clown potion formula from the secret order. After a further exchange of information, Klein announced the end of the gathering. By your will, Ori and Alger stood up together. Cutting off the connections, he saw both their figures shatter and disappear. Klein rubbed his glabella and attempted conjuring a Smurf account with his mind. As he thought, a figure appeared at the furthest end of the long bronze table. That figure was wearing a black tuxedo, a silk top hat, and a dull expression. His actions were clumsy and inarticulate. Even though he was engulfed in grey fog, it was obvious that something was wrong with him. That won't do. Klein experimented a few more times before sighing and dismissing the idea of creating a Smurf account. He attempted other things too. He continued to sit above the grey fog in the seat of honor at the long bronze table. He considered what Ori had said, and he cast his gaze curiously at the illusory crimson stars. After a moment of silence, Klein started to pray as a form of feedback instead of establishing contact with those stars. Amidst the tranquility and silence, he didn't receive any feedback from the 10+ crimson stars nearby. In order to receive feedback, I need to pull someone above the grey fog before I can reply. Klein nodded as he thought, feeling somewhat disappointed. He didn't want to violate someone else's will and forcefully pull them into this mysterious space. Klein was just getting ready to leave, but he habitually touched a nearby illusory crimson star. Just then, he suddenly felt that there was a faint and insignificant prayer deep inside the crimson star. A prayer? Klein's mind stirred as he used the same method he used back when he spied on the Hanged Man. He allowed his spirituality to spread outward and touch the crimson blob. A hazy and contorted image appeared within his sight. He could faintly see a blonde teen kneeling on the ground, facing a pure crystal ball. That teenager was dressed in a tight-fitting black outfit, with a style very different from the contemporary styles of the Loan Kingdom. It was more congruent with the traditional clothing of the Fisak Empire and the Intis Republic that Klein had seen from reading magazines. The area surrounding the teenager was dark and hid old furniture. From time to time, the room would be illuminated, but Klein couldn't hear the roaring thunder or the pattering of rain. In the image, the teenager had his hands on his forehead, fingers crossed. He bowed forward, continually praying for something. His thick accent buzzed in Klein's ears. Klein listened attentively but discovered an awkward fact. He couldn't understand what the other party was saying. It was a language that he had never come across in his life. To think that I cannot understand a foreign language even though I am the mysterious ruler of this world above the grey fog. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He indignantly tried listening in once again in a manner more attentive than when he had to do English listening comprehension tests back on Earth. As he was listening to the prayers, he gradually discovered something. Even though he had never learned the language the young man was speaking, he found that it had similarities to ancient Fisak. Father-mother, those are likely the meanings of those two terms, right? It is quite similar to ancient Fisak, but not without its differences. Klein creased his brows and slipped into deep thought. Ancient Fisak was a common language in the Fourth Epoch. It is also the root language of all the contemporary languages of this era. Furthermore, it is still evolving. I cannot confirm it right now. He listened to it over and over again, eliminating the possibility of the language being a modern language like Loan, Fisak, or Intis. Could it be a dialect of ancient Fisak? Like the language used in the Antigonus family's diary? Klein tapped his finger on the edge of the bronze table and nodded indiscernibly. There was another possibility. Ancient Fisak didn't spring into existence out of nothing. It was an evolution of Jotun. The language of the giants. The Fisak Empire in the north has always claimed that its people possesses the bloodline of the giants. Perhaps this is ancient Jotun. At this point, Klein, who lacked knowledge, could only stop. He retracted his spirituality, without looking or listening into that scene. He had no intention of pulling the praying teen up above the fog immediately. He wanted to know what the young man was talking about first. Of course, before that, he had to observe him frequently and conduct basic tests. Phew, Klein exhaled as he leaned back in his chair. He enveloped himself with his spirituality and simulated the feeling of falling. After revising Racel's diary, Klein changed into his formal wear and left for the Divination Club. He took the public transport despite his pay rise, but he did splurge to support Mrs. Wendy's business. He spent 1.5 pence on sweet iced tea to combat the afternoon heat. When he arrived at Howe Street, Klein tossed the empty cup into the trash can and walked up to the second floor. Before entering the building, he pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. Klein had just entered the hall when he felt a faint, lingering grief. The pretty receptionist Angelica was sitting there. Her slightly red eyes looked unfocused. The grief will pass in time, Klein said with a gentle and firm tone as he walked toward Angelica. Angelica looked up abruptly and muttered, clearly confused, "Mr. Moritti." She quickly came to her senses and asked, perturbed, "Why, you already know about Mr. Vincent?" "Oh right, I forgot that you're an exceptional fortune teller." Klein sighed appropriately. "I only managed to divine a very rough outline of what transpired. Just what exactly happened to Mr. Vincent. The boss told us that Mr. Vincent had a heart attack in his sleep and left this world peacefully. Angelica cried as she said, he was so friendly, so polite, a true gentleman. He was the spiritual mentor of so many of our members. He was still so young. I am sorry for bringing up this sad topic." Klein didn't console her any further. He walked toward the meeting room slowly. Angelica took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes and nose. She then looked at Klein's back and asked loudly, "Mr. Moritti, what would you like to drink?" "Black tea." Klein preferred black tea to coffee, even though he found the black tea average. In comparison, he preferred ginger beer and sweet iced tea. But as a gentleman, it was not right for him to act like a child in a formal setting. As it was a Monday, there were only 5 or 6 members in the meeting room. Using his spirit vision, Klein saw that they each had different colors of emotion. Some were grieving, some more dull, some relatively unaffected. They're all rather normal reactions. Klein nodded slightly. He picked up his cane and found a spot in the room. He was about to deactivate his spirit vision when he saw Angelica walk in and walked towards him. "Mr. Moritti, a customer is looking for you." "Well, it's the person from last time," the beautiful lady said with a hushed tone. "You still remember him?" Klein asked with a smile. I wonder if he bought a magical medicine as I instructed. I wonder if he still needs surgery." Angelica covered her mouth and said, he was the only person who was willing to wait an entire afternoon in the club for a divination. Klein grabbed his cane and stood up. He walked outside without saying anything. In the reception area, he found the person who had sought his services the other day. He also noticed that the aura near his liver had regained its normal color. His overall health had also improved. "Congratulations, the feeling of being healthy is wonderful indeed." Klein smiled as he extended a hand. Bogda was first taken aback before he immediately extended both hands. He grabbed Klein's right palm tightly. "Mr. Moritti, you truly can see my condition." "Yes, I have fully recovered. The doctors asked me questions over and over again, ran repeated tests on me, but they cannot believe that I recovered just like that." Upon hearing Bogda's ecstatic description, Klein calmly confirmed one thing: the apothecary at Lawson's Folk Herb Store was definitely a beyonder. He had seen how severe the man's liver disease had been. Fully healing him in the span of a few days was beyond the capability of herbs and medical ability. The only possible explanation was that of a beyonder. Coupled with the incident with Glassis, there could only be one answer. "I have to repent to God. To think that I would suspect this miraculous doctor." Bogda refused to let go of Klein's hand. He continued on about his shame and gratitude. "Those £10 were truly money well spent. It bought my life back." "What, £10? You spent £10 on the miraculous medicine? And you only gave me 8 pence for my divination. Just 8 pence, 8 pence." Klein was dazed just hearing about it. At this moment, Bogda released his hands as he took a step back while beaming. He bowed reverently and said, "I am here today to express my gratitude. Thank you, Master Moritti. You showed me the way and saved my life. This was the outcome of you paying to have something divined." "You need not thank anybody." Klein lifted his head slightly and looked at the divide between the wall and the ceiling. His answer fully expressed the vibes of a charlatan. "You are a true seer," Bogda praised. "Next, I'll be heading to Glad Street to thank the apothecary and buy the medicine he recommended." "Haven't you already recovered?" Klein expertly hid the shock in his voice. Bogda looked around and laughed when he confirmed that the receptionist was not paying attention to them. He chuckled softly and said, "The doctor mentioned a concoction of herbs that includes mummy powder. It is a prescription that would satisfy both men and women. I didn't believe the doctor back then, but I have no more doubts now. There's a prescription like that." Klein suddenly felt that the apothecary was a cheat, and suspected if he had pushed the person in front of him into a fiery pit of doom. He observed Bogda and confirmed that there was no problem with his aura. "Mummy powder?" Klein cautiously asked. "Yes, mummy powder. I have asked a friend. He said that even the nobles of Backland are maniacally looking for such an item. It's a powder made by grinding mummies which gives men peak performance in bed. Even though it's disgusting and sounds dirty, it truly is a material used by the aristocrats." Bogda gave a detailed description. He had an eager desire in his eyes. Mummies made from corpses, then grinding them to powder. Klein was dumbfounded. He nearly retched in front of Bogda. "Those nobles sure are hardcore." Just as he was about to advise Bogda against doing so, Glassis, who had suffered from a lung disease previously, stepped into the door and heard Bogda's description. "Yes, it's very effective. I would recommend that you head to Lawson's Folk Herb Store at Glad Street. Mr. Lawson's secret recipe is very effective." Glassis took off his spectacles and leaned over with interest. He recommended with a hushed tone, "My experience was very, very, very perfect." "You know of it too. I was just about to head to Mr. Lawson's folk herb store. Bogda's worries vanished completely. After a short conversation, he left the divination club in a hurry. Up until then, Klein was still a little dumbfounded. He waited till 5:20 in the afternoon before putting on his hat and picking up his black cane. He took a carriage down to Vlad Street, intending to observe the apothecary named Lawson Darkweed before deciding if he should notify the captain or not. 18 Vlad Street. Klein stood outside the herb store and saw the closed door, as well as a subletting notice. Quite a wary man, he muttered silently. Since this had happened, he no longer had to be troubled or perform any observations. By the afternoon of the next day, Klein had fully recovered from any signs of exhaustion. He walked into the Blackthorn Security Company with steady footsteps. Good morning, Klein. The weather is so cool and beautiful today. I'm looking forward to tonight's feast. Roseanne, who was wearing a light green dress, greeted him with a smile from behind the reception desk. Klein deliberately touched his stomach and said, Miss Roseanne, you shouldn't be talking about that so early in the morning. I'm already sick of today's mission that has yet to arrive. I only hope for the evening to arrive sooner. Me too, Roseanne chuckled. She looked to the left and right, and she beckoned for Klein to come closer. She lowered her voice and said, I met Madame Daly earlier. Spirit medium Madame Daly? Klein asked in surprise. The most famous spirit medium from our county had been living at Enmat Harbour all this time, and it wasn't a short distance from Tingen. Yes, Roseanne gave a firm nod and said, but she has already left. Ah, she is my ideal beyonder. If I were to become a spirit medium, I would leave Tingen and travel all around the world by myself. To Intis, to Fisak, to Fenapoto, to the southern continent, to the vast prairies, primitive forests, and snow-covered plains. Lady, be aware of Venatorp's rules. Klein shook his head in amusement. Even Madame Daly has to apply and obtain permission to leave Enmat Harbour. I know that, but you can't just remind me about it now and shatter my dreams, Roseanne said grieved. The truth is, I would never become a beyonder. It's too dangerous. I know when I'll die from sudden gunfire. From what I've seen, beyonders are basically people who turn themselves into monsters to fight against monsters. Archbishop Kanish said that we are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness, Klein replied, sighing. The quote had left a deep impression on him. To fight against the abyss, we have to endure the corruption of the abyss. The two of them fell silent in unison. Roseanne was the first to break the silence as she pursed her lips towards the partition and said, Captain wanted you to meet him when you arrived. All right. With his hat and cane in hand, Klein passed through the partition and entered Dunn's office after knocking on the door. A middle-aged gentleman with deep and serene grey eyes and a high hairline put down his coffee cup and said with a smile. Daly was here. Can't say that I'm surprised. Roseanne had just informed me, Klein replied with a smile. Dunn didn't mind his humour but sighed. Daly was just transferred to the Backland Diocese, which is the world's busiest and most crowded city. They have the highest population of beyonders and the most opportunities. She has a higher chance of becoming an archbishop or a senior deacon than me. Why? Klein asked curiously as he took a seat. Dunn thought for nearly 20 seconds before answering. She has a unique talent in mastering and exploiting sequence potions. I've mentioned the internal rule of the talks before. If you want to consume the next potion in the sequence, you'll have to wait 3 years and go through a strict examination to prevent any loss of control. But typically, 3 years is far from sufficient. I spent 3 years going from a sleepless to a midnight poet. It took me 9 years to go from a midnight poet to nightmare, a full 9 years. And to go from nightmare to sequence 6, I've already spent 3 years. I have no idea how many more years I need. When our bodies age and our energy starts to decline, even if we overcome the latent dangers, we shouldn't attempt advancing anymore. This is because the risk of losing control at that point is so high that no one is willing to risk it. As for Daly and I, we are different from most beyonders. After she became a corpse collector, she handed in a special application after only a year. She hoped to consume the follow-up potion immediately. What surprised everyone was that she actually passed through the stricter examination and obtained the Gravediger potion. It only took her 1 more year to go from Gravediger to Spirit Medium. Hey, this year will be her 5th year as a beyonder. She is only 24 this year, young enough to have many opportunities ahead of her. On the surface, she's the most famous spirit medium in our county, but she truly is an actual spirit medium, isn't that acting? Old Neil had apparently mentioned that Madame Daly had similar tendencies. Klein felt that he had grasped the key reason for Madame Daly's quick ascension through the ranks. Captain, you're young enough as well. You're only in your 30s, Klein comforted Dunn, but added in his heart, it's just that your memory isn't that great. Dunn drank a sip of his coffee. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Why didn't you ask Madame Daly about her method of mastering and exploiting sequence potions? Klein purposely asked. Dunn put down his coffee cup and massaged his temples as he spoke. She told me to become a true nightmare. I don't know what that means. Play the role of a nightmare. Man, a nightmare sounds sinister. Klein creased his eyebrows and temporarily fell silent. Then, Dunn took out his smoking pipe and sniffed at it. Daly and I discussed the possibility of Seer's follow-up potion being Clown. Assuming that the member of the Seers didn't lie to you, she brought up an interesting hypothesis. What hypothesis? Klein asked hurriedly, his eyes turning bright. He had once used the divination method to determine if Clown was the follow-up potion of Seer. The answer he received had been vague, but it seemed close to being a confirmation. Dunn's deep and serene grey eyes swept his gaze at him while he said in thought, a normal sequence pathway proceeds in a step manner. They advance according to a particular similarity. For instance, Sleepless, Midnight Poet, and Nightmare are all obviously related to the darkness of the night, as well as the peaceful sleep and tranquility that is generated from sleep. It can be imagined that every subsequent sequence will have identical traits, only with more power and a wider scope. They might be linked to secrets, disaster, horror, the crimson moon, etc. Certain sequence pathways appear unrelated, but when we analyze them in detail, we can still find similarities, such as assassin and instigator. Their implied similarity is to bring people calamities, pain, sorrow, and despair. Hence, the follow-up sequences should abide by this pattern. Klein paid close attention and asked proactively, but Seer and Clown doesn't have such a connection? Yeah, Dunn nodded and said, Daddy believes that there might be sequence pathways that share another kind of relationship. After all, there's a lot we do not know. He paused for a moment before saying, Daddy said that, in this sort of pathway, the low to mid-sequence potions would respectively provide the Beyonder an ability that seems brand new and unrelated to the others. When the Beyonder reaches a point of qualitative change, these abilities will mix into an abnormally powerful job that includes them all. In other words, the pathway doesn't advance step by step, but instead it's a relationship of dissection and combination. Klein listened intently, but he felt lost. Dunn lifted his right hand and said, a normal sequence pathway advances a bit at a time, just like a child growing up. A growing child becomes taller, stronger, heavier, and more mature from a young age, while special sequence pathways are more like. Having said this, Dunn lifted up his thumb. This is sequence 9. Then, he lifted up his index finger. This is sequence 8. Then, he gradually lifted up the rest of his fingers. Each and every finger is independent, and doesn't seem to be related to the others. But in the end, when he said the word end, Dunn clenched his fingers into a tight fist. I understand now. Klein was suddenly enlightened. He agreed with Lady Valley's guess and the captain's metaphor. Maybe that's how it is. He nodded in deep thought. Sequence 8 Clown and Sequence 9 Seer are completely different and have brand new abilities. And according to the description from the Netork's intelligence, the corresponding Sequence 7 and Sequence 8 Clown don't share any similarities either. Klein fell silent for a while before curiously pressing on, at which stage would the different abilities combine to form a qualitative change. Dunn took another sip of coffee and chuckled. Daddy, and I guessed Sequence 4. Why? Klein blurted out. Because according to the way the churches categorize sequences, Sequence 4 is the beginning point of the higher sequences. It is said that merely achieving such a level brings about qualitative changes in vitality and energy. In ancient times, Sequence 4 Beyonders were qualified to be called demigods in the fourth epoch. It's a pity that such Beyonders are very rare in this era, Dunn said wistfully. If Sequence 4 to Sequence 1 are high sequence Beyonders, then who are the low sequence Beyonders? Klein asked with interest. Sequences 9 through 7 were considered as low sequences 1,000 years ago. But, in recent centuries, Beyonders are few in number and each church has listed Sequence 7 as a mid-sequence. Dunn laughed in a self-deprecating manner. Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 are low sequences. Then, Sequences 7 through 5 are mid-sequences. Finally, those Sequence 4 and above are high sequences Klein repeated in his head and inevitably felt a yearning for that. Emperor Cell was a high sequence Beyonder. However, the higher the sequence, the greater the risk of losing control, Klein thought to himself in fear. He asked as though in a seemingly casual manner, what is the Sequence 4 potion for the Church of the Goddess called? In actual fact, I'm not sure. My security clearance isn't high enough for me to be privy to that information. I'll be able to read them when I become a diocese bishop or Netork's deacon. Dunn shook his head and smiled. In fact, at least half of the church's 13 archbishops and 9 senior deacons at the top of the church's hierarchy are below Sequence 4. That's just me being optimistic. The Archbishop Intzon who became wanted, lost control when he tried to advance to Sequence 4. The one who stole sealed artifact 0-08. His potion was apparently called Gatekeeper. Klein thought and probed. Is Sleepless Sequence 5 Gatekeeper? No, that's in Spirit Medium's pathway. You'll be allowed to access that information when you reach Sequence 7 and become a bishop or a captain of the Netork's team. Gatekeeper is Sequence 5 of the Spirit Medium pathway. Does it mean that it's keeping watch over the gates to hell? Or keeping watch over the gates to the spirit world? Klein guessed. All right, go to Old Neil and continue with your studies. Dunn smiled and said, don't forget about dinner tonight, at Old Will's restaurant. Reservations have been made. I'll introduce you to the rest of the Netorks officially. All right, I've already prepared the money. Klein forced a smile. No, there's no need. Have you forgotten that we have additional bonuses? The part about you completing an assigned mission. Dunn waved. Klein was momentarily taken aback before replying with a beaming smile. All right, Captain. He turned around and walked towards the door, while counting inwardly, 3, 2, 1. Why didn't Captain call me back? Klein dragged out 1 for a very long time, only to be surprised that Captain Dunn Smith hadn't forgotten out anything. A miracle. In the armory, Old Neil stole a glance at Klein, who was in a good mood. Don't be obsessed with tonight's dinner. You still have a lot of things to learn, such as more ritualistic magic, ancient Hermes, dragonish, elvish, and many more. Yeah, every afternoon besides your day off, you have to have at least 2 hours of combat training with an instructor. Combat training? Captain didn't mention it. Klein was shocked. Old Neil nodded and didn't hesitate to answer. He forgot. At 2 in the afternoon, outside of a simple 2-storied building that was in disrepair at the outskirts of the North Borough. Klein, who was in his probationary inspector uniform, looked at the weed-filled garden and the vines that had crept up the walls. He turned his head in surprise. My combat instructor lives here? Shouldn't a combat artist who was selected by the Netorks be exceptional? Leonard Mitchell, who had guided Klein there, snickered and said, "Don't underestimate Mr. Gawain because of his residence's surroundings." Although he was never conferred an aristocratic title, he was a true knight back in the day. Having said that, the poetic Nitork, who was dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless leather boots suddenly felt melancholic. He was active during the waning era of the knights. The warriors donning their armors would storm through enemy ranks despite the gunfire and cannon fire, destroying their enemies and redefining the battle lines. But alas, they were quickly met with the invention of the high-pressure steam guns and six-barrel machine guns. From then on, the knights had to gradually step down. Mr. Gawain met the same fate. More than 20 years ago, our Knights Order of Chivalry faced the most advanced weaponry of the Intis Republic Army. Sigh, every time I recall this. It seems like I'm touching the dust heaps of history. The poet in me stirs when thinking of this irreversible and fated destiny, but alas, I do not know how to compose a poem. Then what's the point in saying so much? Klein acted oblivious to Leonard's self-deprecation and gave a serious suggestion. My university schoolmate once told me that the composing of poems requires a certain degree of talent. It's best you start by reading the classical poems anthology of the Loan Kingdom. Leonard's mood changed on a whim. He replied with a light-hearted tone, "I purchased that book a long time ago, as well as other titles, such as the selected poems of Emperor Lascelles. I will work hard to become a true midnight poet, Mr. Sear." Is he hinting at the acting method? Klein replied, as though he couldn't understand him, "You would still need books on grammar." "All right, let's enter." Leonard extended his hand and pushed open the half-closed metallic gates. The two of them then followed the path towards the house. They were still a distance away from the house when Klein saw a tall man walking out from behind the main door. He had short blonde hair, his brows already laced with white hairs. His facial features looked like they had been ravaged through age, his wrinkles were etched deep across his face. "What are you doing here?" the aged man asked in a deep voice. "Mr. Gawain, as per your contract with the police department, this probationary inspector will be learning the art of combat under your guidance," Leonard explained with a smile. "Combat? There's no need to study combat in this era." Gawain looked at Klein with turbid eyes and said in a dead voice, "You should learn how to draw your gun and shoot. You should master the most advanced weaponry." Was this the psychological trauma caused by the six-barrel machine guns and high-pressure steam guns? Klein didn't give a reckless reply. Instead, he smiled and looked at Leonard. "The art of combat is still a skill a policeman has to master. Most of the criminals we face are not those who must be executed on the spot. Some might not even have weapons. In that case, we have to rely on combat techniques," Leonard said, obviously prepared for the situation. With a dark expression, Gawain fell silent for more than 10 seconds before saying, "Throw a punch." He was speaking to Klein. Klein, who was not holding his cane, remembered the boxing matches he had seen in his previous life. He raised his arm and threw it forward. Gawain's lips twitched indiscernibly. He thought for a moment and said, "Kick." Tilting to the side slightly and twisting his hips, Klein tightened his thigh muscles and kicked forward with his right foot. Gawain covered his mouth and cleared his throat. He looked at Leonard and said, "I will honor my contract. But based on his foundation, he needs to come here 4 times a week, 3 hours each time, for the first month. You're the combat expert. It's up to you." Leonard nodded without hesitation. He smiled and said to Klein, "See you at dinner." After Leonard walked out the metallic gates, Klein asked out of curiosity, "Instructor, how should I begin practicing? Punching, or footwork?" As a qualified keyboard warrior, he understood the importance of footwork in combat. Gawain stood akimbo as he shook his head lethargically. "What you need now is strength training. See those? Those are 2 dumbbells made of steel. They shall be your partners for today. Other than that, you also have to practice deep squats, running, and rope skipping. Let us take those 1 set at a time." While Klein was still in a daze, Gawain suddenly raised his voice and said sternly, "Understood." Understood. At this moment, Klein felt as though he had returned to military training and was facing an inhumane instructor. "Change out of your clothes. There's a set of knight's training clothes on the sofa." Gawain suddenly sighed. He turned around and walked toward the black steel dumbbells. 6 in the evening, at a corner table of the Old Will restaurant. Other than Fry, who was guarding Kenner's gate, all the members of the Blackthorn Security Company were present. There were 6 Nighthawks and 5 civilian staff. A white tablecloth was draped over the long table. Waiters carried over plates of food, portioned them before serving them to each individual guest. Klein saw steaks drenched in black pepper sauce. He saw bacon, sausages paired with mashed potatoes, egg puddings, asparagus, and specialty cheeses. He even saw rose-colored champagne. However, he had no appetite. The training in the afternoon had nearly made him vomit. Noticing the pale, newly inducted Nitork with turbid eyes, Gunn raised a glass of red wine in front of him and laughed. "Let us welcome our newest official member, Klein Moretti. Cheers." The cold and introverted black-haired lady, Royal Redine, the sleepless Canley White, the sloppy Leonard Mitchell, as well as the white-haired, black-eyed midnight poet Seekatron all raised their cups and looked at the new member of their team. Klein fought back the discomfort of the training and raised his glass of amber champagne. He stood and said, "Thank you." He clinked glasses with every Nitork, tilted his head back, and finished the small amount of champagne. "Is our Miss Author not going to say something on this occasion?" Gunn smiled as he looked at Seekatron. Seekatron was a lady in her 30s. She had average looks, but had an exceptional demeanor, one that was quiet and serene. Coupled with her few strands of greying hair, it added a unique charm to her. Klein had heard old Neil mention that this midnight poet had taken on a side job as an author and had attempted to submit her works to newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, only a few smaller newspapers had accepted them. Seeker smiled and looked at Dunn. In order to make the term Miss Author into a reality, Captain, I think you should give me some funds to self-publish my work. Dunn laughed. You should learn from old Neil and give me a more suitable reason. I'm most impressed with Mr. Neil in this department, Roseanne echoed in between her mouthfuls of roast mutton. Amidst the chatter and laughter, Leonard looked at Klein and said with a chuckle, Are you so tired that you have no appetite to eat? Yeah, Klein sighed. If you haven't touched your food yet, I can be of assistance. Leonard acted as though he didn't want to waste any food. Klein didn't mind. He nodded and said, that wouldn't be an issue. And with that, a good portion of the food in front of him was eaten by Leonard and the rest. Nearing the end of the dinner, the waiters served plates of beef pudding and ice cream. Klein tasted ice cream and found it cold and sweet. It was particularly appetizing. Before he realized it, he had finished the ice cream drizzled with a blueberry sauce. And as a result of this, he started to feel the hunger pangs. It was a hunger which demanded recharging food that came after intense exertion. Swallowing his saliva, Klein looked to the front, only to see that all the plates were empty. There were no leftovers. Let's end the dinner here, and give Klein a final toast, Dunn suggested. Before finishing his sentence, Klein asked, Captain, may I order another plate of food? The group fell silent after hearing such a request, only to break out into chuckles moments later. Ha ha, you've finally recovered. No problem, order 2 plates if you want to. Dunn shook his head and laughed. While patiently waiting an unbearable amount of time, Klein heard his stomach growling. Finally, a freshly prepared black pepper steak was served before him. His fork and knife danced as Klein finished the medium-done steak in 90 seconds, tears nearly falling from his eyes. The meat juices and the fragrance of the sauce lingered in his mouth. Some time later, Klein let out a satisfied sigh as he looked at his empty plate. He put down his knife and fork and took a sip of his champagne. Waiter, the bill please. Dunn turned around and called for the waiter. The waiter went to the counter, then returned with the check. He gave a thorough breakdown. You opened 5 bottles of Desire champagne, each bottle being 12 solly and 3 pence. A small glass of Southville red wine for 10 pence each. Black pepper beef steak was 1 solly 2 pence each. Serving of beef pudding was 6 pence. The servings of ice cream was 1 solly each. The total would be £5, 9 solly, and 6 pence. £5, 9 solly, and 6 pence? That's nearly my weekly salary. A restaurant is indeed much more expensive than eating at home. Klein clicked his tongue upon hearing that. He felt lucky that the captain had said that he didn't need to pay out of his own pocket. They had some petty cash from bonus earnings. He calculated the cost carefully and noticed that the most expensive portion of the meal was the alcohol. 5 bottles of champagne had cost more than £3. This is no different from Earth. Klein secretly rubbed his stomach and forced down the last of his champagne. The next morning, Klein felt bloated. He tried to get off the bed in his sleepy stupor. Just as he exerted strength, he was instantly awakened by his aching muscles. He felt as though his body wasn't under his control. What a familiar feeling. It's the same as that day after we got punished with frog jumps. Today is a rest day, but I still have to pay a visit to my mentor and see if I can borrow the monograph on the Horn's Ice Main Peak from the library at the university. Klein's lips twitched as he made his way outside with some effort. He wanted to draw a gasp with every step. Klein, what happened to you? Militia, who had just come out of the bathroom, sized up her brother suspiciously for his odd posture and slow movement. Faced with his sister's question, all Klein could do was reply with a regretful smile, sore muscles. He originally believed that by consuming the sequence potion, his constitution would be enhanced as a beyonder. But the harsh reality told him that Asir's stats points were all allocated to his spirituality, mind, intuition, and interpretation. It didn't aid him in adjusting to combat training quickly. As for the original Klein, he had focused on his studies early on and had suffered from malnutrition. That led him to possess a below-average physical condition. The fact that he was having after effects from working out was to be expected. Sore muscles. I remember you returning after dinner last night, and you didn't do anything else. Does alcohol cause sore muscles? Melissa inquired with an inquisitive look. Does alcohol cause sore muscles, sis? That question can't help but make me have inappropriate thoughts. Klein laughed dryly and said, No, this has nothing to do with alcohol. It was from yesterday afternoon. I joined the company's combat training. Combat? Melissa was even more astonished. Klein organized his thoughts and said, Well, this is what happened. I considered it and believed that as a historical and relic consultant of a security company, it's impossible for me to stay in the office or port warehouse forever. Perhaps there will come a day when I have to accompany them to the villages or an ancient castle, to the site of some relic. That might require me to hike, to cross rivers, and to walk a lot. I'll have to endure all sorts of tests posed by nature, so I have to possess a sufficiently healthy body. So you joined combat training to enhance your stamina? Melissa seemed to understand her brother's intention. That's right, Klein answered with great affirmation. Melissa said with a frown, But that isn't gentlemanly. Don't you always keep yourself to the standards of a professor? A professor only requires the ability to read historical documents, ponder over difficult questions, and maintain a polite and gentlemanly demeanor. Of course, I'm not saying that those aren't all good things. I prefer men who can solve problems on their own, regardless of whether that solution requires brawn or brain. Melissa smiled. Klein smiled and said, No, Melissa. Your definition of a professor contains a misconception. A true professor can communicate with people gently and politely. But he can also educate the other person using the principles of physics by raising a cane to convince someone when there is an obstacle in communication. Principles of physics. Melissa was momentarily at a loss, but she quickly understood what her brother was saying. She was suddenly unable to retort him. Klein didn't say anything more but widened his pace with great difficulty as he headed for the bathroom. Melissa stood there and looked for a few seconds. She suddenly shook her head and caught up to Klein. "Do you need my help?" She posed as if she was supporting someone. "No, there's no need to. I was hamming it up a bit earlier." Klein felt humiliated. He suddenly stood straight and walked normally. Watching her brother walk steadily to the washroom and close the door, Melissa pursed her lips and muttered, "Klein is getting more and more pretentious. I even believed that his muscle soreness was really that serious." In the bathroom, Klein stood behind the tightly shut door, his face suddenly contorting in pain. Ouch, ouch, ouch. He held his breath, tensed his body, and stood there for a good 7 or 8 seconds. When he finally went downstairs with great effort, had breakfast, and saw Benson and Melissa off, his soreness finally began to ease. After resting for a little while, Klein took his cane, donned his top hat, and left the house, strolling towards the public carriage stop. During the summer, Coy University had trees with shade providing foliage, flourishing with birds and luxuriant flowers. It was peaceful and calm. Walking along the river, Klein took a turn towards the history department. Then, he found the 3-story building which showed its age and located his mentor's, Cohen Quinton's, office. He knocked and entered the room, but he was shocked to see that the man sitting at his mentor's seat was the academic, Azaik. "Good morning, Mr. Azaik. Where's my mentor?" "We made an appointment by letter to meet here at 10, Klein asked, puzzled. Azaik, who was Cohen Quinton's best friend and often debated with his mentor regarding academic topics, smiled and said, "Cohen had a last-minute meeting and went to Tingen University. He asked me to wait for you here." He had bronze skin, an average height and build, black hair, brown eyes, and gentle facial features. Being in his presence brought on an indescribable feeling, as though you could see in the man's eyes that he had been through the vicissitudes of life. Under his right ear was a tiny mole that one wouldn't notice unless closely examined. Having said the reason, Azaik suddenly frowned as he carefully observed Klein. Feeling confused by the sudden scrutiny, Klein looked at his attire. "Have I committed some breach of etiquette?" Tuxedo, black vest, white shirt, black bow tie, dark-colored trousers, leather boots with no buttons, everything seems normal. Azaik's brows eased and he chuckled softly. "Don't mind me. I suddenly noticed that you were way more energetic than before. You look even more like a gentleman now." "Thank you for your compliment." Klein accepted it calmly and asked, "Mr. Azaik, did my mentor manage to find the book, Research of the Hornus Ice Main Peaks Relics, in the school library?" "He found it with my assistance," Azaik said, smiling gently. He then pulled open the drawer and took out a grey-covered book. "You are no longer a Coy University student anymore. You can read it here, but you cannot take it home." "All right." Klein delightfully took the academic monograph, and with a hint of fear. The book's design was fully in line with the current trends. It used hard paper as a hardcover, and it was printed with an image like an abstract version of the main peak of Hornus Ice Mountain Range. Klein took a glance and found a seat. He flipped open the book and started reading carefully, line by line. As he became engrossed in the book, he suddenly realized that there was a cup of rich and fragrant coffee by his side. "Help yourself to the sugar and milk." Azaik put down the silver saucer and pointed at the milk jar and sugar container. "Thank you." Klein nodded with gratitude. He added 3 cubes of sugar and a teaspoon of milk before continuing to read his book. The book, Research of the Hornus Ice Main Peaks Relics, was not a very thick book. Klein finished reading it when it was almost noon. He took note of a few noteworthy points. First, the settlement on the main peak of Hornus Ice Mountain and its surrounding area was obviously an advanced civilization, which existed as part of an ancient nation. Second, from their wall murals, their perspective on life appears similar to that of humans. I can assume for now that they were human. Third, they revered yet feared the darkness of the night. Hence, they called their god the ruler of the Evernight, mother of the sky. Fourth, the weirdest part is that researchers haven't found any graves in the entire area, which initially seems to indicate that the people didn't need to be buried, because they didn't die. However, that would be contradictory to the contents of the wall murals. In the wall murals, the people in the nation believed that death is not the end. They believed that their deceased family would protect them in the night. Hence, they would keep their deceased family members at home, on the bed, by their side, for a full 3 days. There is nothing beyond that for the wall murals, as it doesn't involve burials. Klein took another sip of coffee and continued to write down his afterthoughts in his notebook. Mother of the Sky, Ski Mother is such a grand title, while the ruler of the Evernight obviously overlaps with the Evernight goddess. Is this a contradiction at its roots? In the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornus Ice Mountain Range and its surrounding area, every arrangement and decoration was well preserved. Even the wall murals didn't have any signs of damage. Before it was discovered, there seemed to be no disturbance at all. The table was arranged with cutlery, and there were dried stains of rot on the dining plates in some rooms. There were half-filled bottles of alcohol that had almost turned into plain water. What happened to the nation's people? They seem to have left their homes in a hurry, without taking anything with them, and they never returned. Considering how there are no burial grounds, this only makes it weirder. The author, Mr. Joseph, also mentioned that when he first discovered the remains, he even had the belief that the people residing there had just vanished all of a sudden. Klein stopped writing and cast his gaze at an illustration. On John Joseph's third visit to the main peak of the Hornus Ice Mountain Range, he had used a new camera model to shoot a monochrome photograph. In the photo, the lofty palace had a collapsed wall and was overgrown with weeds. It followed a grander style for its design. When he flipped to the photograph, Klein's first thought was that of the palace he had seen in his dream. The two styles were identical. The only difference was that the one he had dreamed of was on a peak, and it was way more magnificent. It also had a huge chair seat of honor that looked like it didn't seat a human. Countless translucent maggots clustered together and squirmed slowly beneath the chair. I can confirm that my dream is related to the ancient remains on the main peak of the Hornus Ice Mountain range that should be the nation of the Evernite, which was referenced in the Antigonus. Family's notebook. Klein nodded slightly and closed the book. At that moment, Azaik, who was sitting opposite him, touched the inconspicuous mole under his right ear and said, "How was it? Found anything?" "Quite a bit. Take a look. I've written so many pages of notes." Klein pointed at the table and smiled. "I don't understand why you're suddenly so interested in this matter." Azaik sighed and said, "Klein, when I was studying at the background university, I had dabbled with some divination and did quite a bit of research on that. Well, I discovered that there is disharmony in your fate." "What? Divination? Are you talking to me about divination?" As a seer, Klein looked at Azaik the academic in amusement. "How is it disharmonious?" Azaik thought for a moment. "Have you encountered many strange coincidences in the past 2 months?" Coincidences. As he was indebted to Mr. Azaik, Klein didn't dispute his question as he subconsciously began thinking. If we are talking about coincidences, the most obvious matter was when we were after kidnappers. We actually managed to find clues of the Antigonus family's notebook that was lost for days in the room opposite the kidnappers. Also, Ray Bieber didn't flee from Tingen in a hurry. Instead, he found a place to digest the power bestowed by the notebook, allowing for sealed artifact 2-049 to track him down easily. That seemed to be against common sense. Although Eliassen gave a reasonable explanation, I always had a nagging feeling that it was somewhat coincidental. Oh, Selena had stolen a glance at Harness Vincent's secret incantations, but she held back to her birthday dinner banquet to try it out, and I happened to discover it. Which is quite a coincidence, too. Otherwise, Harness Vincent wouldn't have been the only one to die so suddenly. Klein thought about it seriously for a few minutes and said, "There are 3. Neither too many, nor too frequent. Furthermore, there was nothing that indicated someone's involvement and guidance." Azaik nodded slightly. As Emperor Cell once said, a single coincidence is encountered by anyone. Twice is still normal. Thrice is when one should consider what internal factors are influencing those coincidences. "Can you tell me anything else?" Klein probed. Azaik laughed and shook his head. "I can only tell that there's some disharmony, but nothing else. You have to understand that I'm not a real seer." "Isn't that basically equal to saying nothing?" "Mr. Azaik is quite odd. He's playing a charlatan in front of a charlatan like me." Klein let out a breath, seizing the moment when Azaik stood up. He pinched his glabella and activated his spirit vision. When he looked over, Azaik saw a fully appeared before his eyes and everything seemed fairly normal. "Unfortunately, I can only see the ether body and astral projection of a person above the grey fog," Klein thought peripherally as he tapped his glabella again whilst standing up. Late in the afternoon, Klein returned home and drew the curtains, allowing his room to slip into darkness. He took out his pen and paper and thought for a long time, finally writing down a sentence. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. As a seer, Klein had tried to divine if those coincidences were a consequence of unnatural developments, but the results showed otherwise. This time, he was influenced by Azaik to look into these events again. He also drew lessons from the suited clown. He seriously designed an appropriate divination statement, eliminating any descriptions that might be vague or cause confusion. "Yes, I should break down the 3 coincidences and divine them separately." Klein nodded in thought as he slowly removed the topaz from his wrist. He held the spirit pendulum with his left hand and allowed it to hang close over the divination statement on the paper. He collected himself and entered a state of cogitation. With his eyes closed, Klein started chanting repeatedly, "The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements." As he recited the statement over and over again, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the pendulum, only to see the topaz turning counterclockwise slowly. "It's still a negative," Klein muttered to himself. He designed several other divination statements, but the results persisted. There was nothing strange about that incident. He then separately divined the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen and Selena's magic mirror divination incident, but the answers for both events were normal. Hey, was I a real seer, frightened by the charlatan Mr. Azaik? Besides, Captain and the others didn't feel that anything was off. Klein laughed and shook his head. But he remained cautious. He planned on using the dream divination technique to get a final confirmation. After some thought, he changed the divination statement to fit the change in method. The true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. As he scribbled with the fountain pen, Klein paused and pondered over his words. After reading it over and over again, he tore the slip of paper and walked toward his bed. He relaxed and lay down. With the divination statement in hand, Klein quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. He found himself in a contorted, broken world. Regaining his senses, he began swimming through the blur. Gradually, he saw the few kidnappers. He saw them lose their final chip at a gambling table, saw them obtain guns from underground sources, and saw them survey the area. They even rented the apartment across Ray Bieber's apartment as their hideout. These didn't form a continuous scene. Instead, they were presented in the form of flashing pictures. Klein couldn't find anything that was abnormal. Furthermore, it had also aligned with the statements given by the kidnappers. After exiting the dream, Klein separately divined the other 2 incidents but had the same result. Their developments followed logic. The coincidences were really coincidences. I was indeed overthinking things. Mr. Azaik is merely a divination enthusiast. Klein stabilized his pendulum and shook his head with a bitter smile. He was about to draw the curtains and allow sunlight into the room when he froze. From the original Klein's impression of Mr. Azaik, he is a dependable and trustworthy person. He had never once said anything baseless. Even if he was always quarreling with Mentor, it was limited to academic topics, and each of them had their reasons. If he was truly a mere divination enthusiast, he wouldn't have interacted with me like that, and the memories of original Klein has nothing about him liking divination, of course. This could be due to the loss of a corresponding memories. Klein frowned and couldn't ease his worries. He needed a way to confirm this. He suspected that Mr. Azai had unwittingly come across some insider information and was trying to remind him by using divination as an excuse. How should I confirm this? Klein paced back and forth across the dark room, trying to recall the other divination techniques he knew. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He suddenly halted as an idea came to him. Let's assume that these coincidences are dubious. I'm unable to divine a result either because my sequence isn't high enough or I'm being affected by outside interference, but I can change my environment. I can change my environment to some place that is even more mysterious and even harder to understand. Klein felt pumped. He pulled open his drawer and took out a silver dagger. He concentrated and allowed his spirituality to flow out from the tip of the dagger, becoming one with his surroundings. With each step he took, the wall of spirituality sealed off the entire room. Klein planned on doing the divination above the grey fog, to do the divination in that mysterious world. In the magnificent ancient divine hall above the endless grey fog. Klein sat at the seat of honor on one end of the bronze table. Before him was a piece of goat skin he willed into existence. He lifted a pen and tried writing the divination statement as he had previously. The kidnapping of Elliot was due to extraordinary elements. He held the spirit pendulum and hung it low. Klein quickly composed himself as he turned silent and ethereal. Half closing his eyes, he recited the statement 7 times, using his spirituality to interact with the spiritual world that stood above all. Feeling the tug of the silver chain, Klein opened his eyes to look at the pendulum. The sight made him freeze immediately. The pendulum was spinning clockwise. This meant that there was an extraordinary element behind Elliot's kidnapping. This was completely different from the result he had gotten in the outside world. There were no traces of any interference. Such power or means is terrifying. What's the motive of the person behind this? Is my fate intertwined with the Antigonus family's diary? Klein was immensely shocked. He lost his calm and the rotation of the pendulum slipped into chaos. He put down the topaz and rubbed his glabella. His expression was abnormally grave. After contemplating for a few seconds, he didn't attempt to divine the other 2 events. Instead, he wrote a new divination statement, the true reason for Elliot's kidnapping. He held the paper in his hand and recited the statement 7 times. Klein leaned back and fell into sleep above the fog. Soon, he saw a boundless, illusory greyish-white fog. The fog dissipated slowly, revealing a colourful grass plain filled with flowers. The space behind the flowers and the plains was folding into itself, like a monster that had come alive. Klein tried his best to look forward, barely making out an image of a dark red chimney. At this point, the scene before him shattered, putting an end to his dream. Klein abruptly straightened his back in the majestic divine hall. His heart was beating wildly without reason. It felt like I had just spied on a terrifying thing. He took in 2 deep breaths to stabilize his chaotic emotions. Tap, tap, tap. Klein tapped on the side of the table some time later and slipped into deep thought. Red chimney, garden, grass plains. How is this related to the person behind all of this? I cannot determine his motive from the coincidences, nor can I conclude that there is any evil intent. In the midst of this thinking, Klein felt alarmed for himself, Captain, Fry, and the others. We are like puppets dancing on a string. What's even scarier is that we thought so highly of ourselves. Sire, I don't know how to raise this matter to Captain. Old Neil's divination produced the same results as mine in the outside world if they asked me to confirm it in front of them. I have no way of doing that. Klein rubbed his temples as if he had a headache. After nearly 20 seconds of calm, he began divining the event of Ray Bieber's stay in Tingen. Similarly, he first used spirit dowsing. This time, Klein was shocked to see his topaz hang motionless. It was neither a confirmation or rejection of the statement. Strange, he muttered. He started to guess the reasons for this phenomenon. The person behind this has sensed my divinations and engaged in countermeasures. Following this, he tried the dream divination technique, but all he saw were fragmented pieces of fog. He no longer made any new discoveries. The results of Selena's magic mirror divination incident were the same. Klein could almost confirm his conjecture at this point. Since he had no way of notifying Captain Dunsmith for the time being, he had an unprecedented motivation to improve his abilities. I must head to the divination club later and quickly succeed in my acting. To digest the seer potion also, I have to confirm whether the clown potion is indeed the subsequent sequence of seer, as well as gather clues about it in addition. I have to interact more with Mr. Azak and see if I can dig up whatever inside information he holds. Klein held his forehead with his right palm and quickly drew up a plan and determined his focal point. After some thought, a goat skin appeared in front of him again. He picked up his pen and wrote, "The corresponding sequence A to sequence 9 seer is clown." From his prior experience, the present Klein was completely convinced that his divination abilities were augmented and enhanced above the grey fog. Just like how raids are usually successful, is this the result of having good luck? He muttered and picked up his spirit pendulum. Some time later, Klein received a definitive answer. The corresponding sequence A to sequence 9 seer was clown. He then wrote on the paper once again. The corresponding sequences 8, 7, 6, and 5 of seer would grant at least one brand new, unrelated power. Klein exhaled as he tried spirit dowsing again. However, he saw the topaz hang motionlessly without any rotations. There isn't enough information to complete the divination and receive the revelation, he muttered to himself while seemingly deep in thought. Then, he set down the silver chain and began considering the required statement for a dream divination. Nearly 20 seconds later, he picked up his fountain pen and wrote seriously, "Clues to the clown potion, clues to the clown potion." On the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, Klein repeated the divination statement a few times before leaning back and entering a deep sleep. His surroundings quickly became peaceful and quiet. He saw a hazy view, with countless distorted and blurry scenes flashing past, just like drops of morning dew on tender flower petals. Gradually, Klein grasped his spirituality and came to his senses. He saw a fireplace before him with a rocking chair in front of it. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Although he couldn't see her face since she was hanging her head low, Klein's gut feeling told him that she was an old lady. And he was pretty certain about it. The old lady was facing a desk directly. There were newspapers and tin cans inlaid with silver on the desk. Klein found the scene before his eyes very familiar, and he quickly recognized what he saw. This was where Ray Bieber and his mother stayed. This was where he saw a bloated cadaver for the first time. There are clues that point to the clown potion here. Just as Klein's thoughts flashed past, the scene around him transformed. It was a greyish-white warehouse, hidden among identical buildings. There were white bones scattered all around, and a few balls of flesh that looked like they had been squashed by a boulder. In the middle of the warehouse was a greyish-white object that was the size of a fist. Its surface was filled with ditches, and it looked soft but ductile. It looked like a brain that had been extracted out of a living being. Just as Klein recognized the scene and recalled something, the scene before him distorted like rippling water before transforming into another new blurry scene. A naked body was laid on a long table covered with a white cloth. There were some bluish, discolored patches on the corpse's skin. Klein suddenly knitted his eyebrows and muttered, it was first the images of Ray Bieber's hiding place and his remains, and now, it's related to the brand on the suited clown's wrist. Just as he attempted to speculate what the scenes meant, the scene suddenly changed again. A marble coffee table, a set of two leather couches, and a chandelier that hung high on the ceiling. There were three people Klein Moretti, who had black hair, brown eyes, and a scholarly temperament, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, and a beautiful young lady with fishnet gloves. Following that, it was another three people and an object, a middle-aged man in a black robe who had thick spiky brown hair, a wealthy man with a chubby body and pale skin, a half-century-old elder with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and grey blue eyes, and a black notebook on the round table in between all of them, a notebook that exuded an ancient and distant air. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klein suddenly sat up straight and the dream vanished. Looking outside the divine hall where there was boundless grey fog and crimson stars, he thought in both shock and confusion. I was divining for clues to the clown potion. Why would the Antigonus family's notebook show up? Let me think. The chubby guy was Welsh. Yes, Welsh, an unfortunate fellow who bought the Antigonus family's notebook and triggered a sequence of incidents. The beautiful young lady wearing fishnet gloves was near. I remember, the marble coffee table and leather couch combination is a hallmark of Welsh's place. I saw Spirit Medium Valley there. In other words, what I saw was Welsh's living room. It was a scene where the original Klein and his two classmates were discussing the notebook. Klein calmed himself down and tapped on the edge of the long bronze table rhythmically. Then, what does the last scene represent? The notebook appeared, Welsh appeared. Could it be the scene where he bought the ancient item? There were another two people, and one of them looked very familiar. I feel like I've seen the middle-aged man in the classic black robe somewhere before. That spiky brown hair, severe dark eye circles. Yes, I know who is he now. Harness Vincent from the Divination Club, the Harness Vincent who died peacefully after Captain snuck into his dream, having learned that Selena secretly obtained the secret incantation from him. No way, he was the one that sold the notebook to Welsh. Everything appears to be coming full circle. The world sure is small, Nottingham is really small. On careful thought, it really is a possibility that Harness Vincent wasn't an ordinary fortune teller. He was obviously deep into mysticism and obtained the attention of an ancient evil god. He had the channels, ability, and opportunity to acquire the notebook that was accidentally released by the secret order. It's no wonder Captain and company never figured out where Welsh bought the notebook. Their investigative approach was entirely wrong. They had attempted to investigate via the antique market, but when the actual whereabouts of the notebook was found, they gave up on that lead. What a pity, Harness Vincent just passed away not too long ago. Otherwise, we definitely could have found out something regarding the notebook. Since he was involved in mysticism, he should have researched the notebook. His death was way too coincidental. However, there was another person at the scene, a man in his 50s. He might know quite a bit of what happened. Klein stopped tapping his fingers on the edge of the table and looked through every scene of his dream divination once more. Ray Bieber's house, Ray Bieber's hideout spot, the remains of Ray Bieber, the brand on the suited clown's wrist, Welsh's house, Welsh, Nivea, and original Klein's exchange. Welsh, Harness Vincent, and the Antigonus family notebooks, group photo. Hair, besides the brand on the suited clown, everything else is directly related to the Antigonus family's notebook. But I had divined for clues to the clown potion. This isn't scientific, nor does it make mystical sense. After becoming a seer, Klein once tried to divine where Welsh had bought the Antigonus family's notebook. But he never considered using the unique qualities that the area above the grey fog possessed. As such, he had failed to receive any revelations, but now, he had chanced upon the truth by divining something separate. After spending nearly 20 seconds to calm down, Klein summarized the context provided by Russell's diary and attempted to interpret his dream divination. The first possibility, Zarathal, or should I say, the secret order, was searching and pursuing the relics of the Antigonus family. So, the symbolic meaning of the dream is to use matters related to the Antigonus family to lure the secret order into appearing, so as to obtain the clown potion's formula. The second possibility, the clown potion's formula is directly recorded in the Antigonus family's notebook. The fact that the Zarathal family is seeking the relics of the Antigonus family implies that they share very deep connections. They could have been allies or enemies. Hence, it seems fairly natural that the Antigonus family possessed parts of their sequence. Things would be obvious if they were allies, but enemies are the ones who would know each other the best. But the second explanation wouldn't be able to link it to the brand on the suited clown. Sigh, I do wish that the second explanation were true, though. When the Holy Cathedral finds an expert to interpret the notebook, I would be able to obtain the clown potion without any risk. It seems that the first explanation is the most plausible. My gut feeling as a seer tells me that there might be a deeper symbolic meaning. Having thought of this, Klein massaged his forehead and suddenly realized the limitations of a seer. Unless it was a very simple and straightforward sign, a seer had to be extremely careful when making interpretations. It was just like walking on the edge of the abyss or walking on a thin layer of ice over a lake's surface. The suited clown's outcome was an actual and bloody example of what a single mistake in interpretation or failure to grasp a key point could result in. In that instant, Klein had an illusion of himself mastering the true essence of a seer. He seemed to be just one step away from digesting the potion completely. Thank you for enlightening me with your life, praised the lady. He muttered and drew a crimson moon before his chest. Then he divined whether Azike had good intentions or if he was an amazing beyonder. He received confirmations for both of them. Eventually, the continuous divinations exhausted Klein. He had no choice but to stop churning through his thoughts and decide on the crucial matters that he needed to attend to. I have to find the man that appeared in the same scene with Welsh, Harness Vincent, and the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. I can begin my search with the Divination Club. I can't just confront Mr. Azike. Yes, he might be a mid-sequence beyonder of the life school of thought, but there's a lack of information, making it impossible for me to divine. Phew. Klein let out a breath and conjured the portrait of the half-century-old Delda with messy eyebrows, thin brown hair, and grey blue eyes on the goatskin that appeared before him. This was the third person present when the Antigonus family's notebook was traded between Welsh and Harness Vincent. Looking at the portrait, Klein suddenly fell into a dilemma. I can't draw. During art class in primary school, I was always the one receiving the greatest criticism from the teachers. Should I use ritualistic magic like old Neil? This was done by praying to the goddess. If I were to use the uniqueness of the area above the grey fog, I would be in trouble if the divinities noticed something amiss. Hold on a second, perhaps I can pray to myself. Transmitting images and transmitting voices are similar, although I'm temporarily unable to access the mysterious power above the grey fog. Accomplishing such a minor matter shouldn't be a problem. Having thought of this, Klein immediately emanated his spirituality to envelop himself to stimulate the feeling of falling. Back in his bedroom, he lit the gas lamp and prayed. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the grey fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your revelation and pray that you allow me to draw what I've seen. After reciting the incantation, Klein didn't splash essential oils or burn any herbs to gain the help of their powers. It was just that informal when praying to oneself. There were suddenly murmurs in his ears as he saw the 4 black dots that formed a square surface on the back of his hand. He walked 4 steps counterclockwise and recited the incantation before penetrating the maniacal chaos to return to the area above the grey fog. This time he didn't see any of the crimson stars shrinking or expanding. But behind the seat of honor at the long bronze table, the strange symbol formed by a partial pupil-less eye and partial contorted lines shimmered weakly as it produced illusory prayers. Klein held his ear to it and listened. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he conjured the portrait of the third person and cast it towards the flowing light in accordance to the prayer's format. After everything was done, he immediately left the mysterious world above the grey fog and returned to his bedroom. Just as he found his footing, a portrait surfaced immediately in front of Klein's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed the weakened illusory power augmenting him. He picked up a fountain pen and found a piece of white paper and expressed his intent. Klein was surprised to find his right hand moving uncontrollably as it quickly drew lines. Before long, he saw a lifelike portrait of the third person. After writing down the hair and eye colors, as well as other unique characteristics, Klein heaved a sigh of relief despite the spasms of his right hand. The illusion before his eyes rapidly dissipated.